What do you do when your children cut you out of their lives? The story of a woman who was betrayed at her son's own wedding. The chill wasn't just in the air-conditioned reception hall, a cavern of forced merriment and ostentatious displays. It was a living entity residing in the pit of my stomach, a cold, hard knot of dread that had been meticulously tightening its coils for weeks, no, months really, ever since Liam, my son, my only child, the boy I'd poured my entire existence into, had announced his engagement to Chloe. I'd smiled, of course, that fixed maternal smile mothers are contractually obligated to wear. I'd offered to help, a vague, polite gesture. But Chloe, with her laser-sharp gaze and a smile that never quite reached her eyes, had interpreted help in its broadest, most financially encompassing sense. And so I'd offered to pay. For everything, the grand historical manor overlooking a manicured botanical garden, a place whispered about in society pages, the cascading floral arrangements, a veritable avalanche of orchids and peonies in hues Chloe had deemed subtly opulent, that undoubtedly cost more than my modest first car, the artisanal 5-tier cake, a marvel of spun sugar and Belgian chocolate, all of it. My savings, the careful harvest of years of diligent work, second jobs I'd taken when Liam was young, Christmases where my own gifts were an afterthought, opportunities I'd foregone. All of it was now on glittering, unapologetic display for hundreds of Chloe's closest acquaintances and a handful of my own bewildered relatives. And where was I, Eleanor Vance, the mother of the groom, the architect of this lavish spectacle, the woman who had single-handedly navigated the treacherous waters of raising a son after his father, Robert, had sailed off into the sunset of his own selfish desires, leaving us adrift with nothing but hollow echoes and a mountain of his unacknowledged debts? My designated seat, if one could call it that, was by the service entrance to the main kitchen. There was no elegantly scripted table card bearing my name, no welcoming smile from the impeccably dressed ushers who seemed to glide across the polished marble floor. Instead, a solitary gunmetal gray folding chair, stark and brutally cold against my silk-clad legs, had been unceremoniously tucked beside a gleaming phalanx of empty bus trays and a monstrous rumbling silver ice machine that sent a continuous jarring vibration through the thin metal legs of my ignominious perch. Through the perpetually swinging kitchen doors, manned by an army of harried staff in starched whites, I could snatch distorted, fleeting glimpses of the main event, a flash of Liam's tailored tuxedo, the almost blinding shimmer of Chloe's diamond-encrusted designer gown, the orchestrated laughter of guests whose faces I barely recognized but whose presence and prodigious thirst I had, it seemed, generously bankrolled. My dress, a soft lavender silk I'd agonized over for weeks and finally splurged on, convincing myself I deserved just one beautiful, elegant thing for this monumental day, now felt like an ill-fitting costume for a tragic comedy I hadn't auditioned for. My carefully styled silver hair, which had taken 2 hours at a salon Chloe had recommended, it all felt like a cruel, elaborate mockery. A painted doll left forgotten in a service corridor. A catering manager, a young man whose forehead was permanently creased with stress lines and whose eyes darted about with the frantic energy of a trapped bird, had mumbled a cursory, almost dismissive apology much earlier in the evening, when I'd first been escorted to my station. Mrs. Vance? The bride, Chloe. She was exceptionally specific about the visual aesthetics and the optimal guest flow near the bridal party's designated area. Sightline considerations, you understand? Visual aesthetics, optimal guest flow. Sightline considerations was my presence, the very sight of me, an aesthetic disruption, me, who had nursed Liam through bouts of croup that left me hollow-eyed for days, who had worked double shifts as a bookkeeper for a grumpy accountant to afford the orthodontic work that had transformed his gappy grin into Chloe's current arm candy's perfect smile, who had celebrated every small, hard-won victory in his life and soothed every tear-soaked disappointment with unwavering love? I remembered, with a clarity that now felt like a punch to the gut, asking Chloe, weeks ago, as gently and non-confrontationally as I could, about the seating arrangements for the reception. She'd flashed me that dazzling, slightly fixed smile of hers, the one that always seemed to be assessing and calculating. "Oh, Eleanor, darling, don't you worry your pretty little head about a single thing. It's all meticulously under control. We just want you to relax, put your feet up, and truly enjoy Liam's special day. You deserve it." Relax, yes. Here I was, relaxing, with the cacophony of clattering dishes, the barked orders of the head chef, and the sharp, vaguely unpleasant scent of industrial dishwasher steam as my primary sensory companions. The rhythmic thump-thump, hiss of the kitchen doors was my orchestra. Liam, my son. He hadn't met my eyes when I'd first arrived at the reception. A carefully wrapped gift for him and Chloe in my hands. He'd been too engrossed, too utterly captivated, beaming beside Chloe as she held court, her delicate hand resting possessively on his tuxedoed arm, her parents, Diana and George, flanking them like a pair of smug real bookends. It was Chloe's mother, Diana, a woman whose acquaintance I'd made on precisely 2 brief, formal occasions, who was now dabbing at Liam's cheek with an embroidered lace handkerchief, murmuring something saccharine that made him chuckle and lean into her affectionately, as if she had been the one to teach him to tie his shoelaces or ride his first two-wheeler down our quiet suburban street, as if she had spent sleepless nights worrying when he was out late with friends as a child. The band, another of Chloe's non-negotiable extravagances, swelled into a syrupy ballad, their first dance as husband and wife. I instinctively craned my neck, leaning precariously on my folding chair, desperate for a proper view, catching another fleeting, disjointed glimpse through the swinging door just as Liam twirled Chloe across the dance floor. Her laughter, light and tingling like shattered glass, drifted back towards me, a cruel counterpoint to the heavy thudding in my own chest. He looked so handsome, so happy, and so utterly, heartbreakingly distant. A stranger in a suit I'd lovingly helped him select and had, naturally, paid for, dancing a dance I wasn't truly invited to witness, let alone participate in. I pressed my lips together, a thin, bloodless line fighting back the acrid sting of unshed tears. "Don't you dare make a scene, Eleanor," I admonished myself fiercely, the voice of years of ingrained stoicism and self-effacement. "Don't be that bitter, resentful mother. This is his day." I had financed this opulent fairy tale, and even from the dimly lit scullery, I was grimly determined that he would have it, untarnished by my visible sorrow. But as the endless, effusive toasts began, each cheerful clink of a champagne flute, a tiny, malicious hammer blow against the fragile dam of my composure, a cold, hard, diamond-sharp resolve began to crystallize in the desolate pit of my stomach. I managed a small, tight smile, a rictus that didn't reach my eyes whenever a waiter hurried past, studiously avoiding eye contact. I stayed quiet. I endured, and after the last ridiculously expensive crumb of that 5-tiered monument to Chloe's exquisite taste was presumably consumed by the sated guests, I knew, with a chilling, absolute certainty, exactly what I was going to do. 1 phone call, perhaps 2. That's all it would take to fundamentally readjust the aesthetic considerations of their perfect, newly launched life together. The thought sent a dangerous, unfamiliar thrill through my veins. The opulent hotel suite, another of Chloe's essential wedding expenditures for the immediate family, though my suite was notably smaller and lacked a view, felt less like a luxurious retreat and more like a beautifully appointed prison cell. Sleep had been an impossibility, a cruel taunt. The lavender silk dress, chosen with such hopeful anticipation, now lay crumpled on a velvet armchair, a vibrant mocking splash of color in the muted, impersonal gold and cream decor. The cloying scent of 1,000 roses and lilies from the wedding, a fragrance I now associated with a peculiar, stomach-churning blend of humiliation and industrial cleaning agents, seemed to have permanently permeated the expensive fabric of my dress, and indeed my very skin. Humiliation, I discovered, was a sticky, invisible film, resistant to even the most fragrant of hotel soaps. My phone, a silent sentinel on the polished mahogany nightstand, had been buzzing and chirping with a life of its own since the early hours of the morning, around 2 a.m. to be precise. Liam, Chloe. Chloe's mother, Diana, her tone in the voicemail shifting from sugary concern to barely veiled irritation. A few genuinely worried texts from my cousin Olivia, who, I recalled with a fresh pang, had offered a fleeting, sympathetic glance across the vast expanse of the reception hall, but had made no move towards the kitchen's service entrance. I ignored them all with a cold, deliberate detachment. What could I possibly say? More importantly, what could they conceivably say that would mend the profound schism, the chasm of disrespect that had opened up? Their words would be hollow, self-serving. I knew that much. I finally pushed myself out of the too-soft, king-sized bed, the digital clock on the bedside table glowing a malevolent, accusatory red. 5:17 A.E. Mill. My joints ached, my head throbbed, a physical manifestation of the emotional bludgeoning I had endured. My tablet, my constant companion for wedding planning, lay on the ornate writing desk, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime. Every vendor, every deposit slip scanned, every little extra that Chloe had cooed was utterly indispensable for their once-in-a-lifetime experience. Oh, Eleanor, it simply wouldn't be us without the vintage champagne fountain flowing with cristal, she'd trilled during one planning session, her eyes alight with avarice. Or the hand-calligraphed Belgian chocolate favors, presented in individual silk boxes, are absolutely non-negotiable, darling. They're an integral part of our love story narrative. I had paid for their love story narrative, every single inflated line item. My finger, surprisingly steady, hovered over the banking app linked to the dedicated credit card I'd established solely for wedding expenses, the card I'd naively, foolishly assumed would only be used for approved, budgeted items we had discussed. My breath hitched, a sharp, painful intake of air, 2 substantial, glaring charges made 3 days before the wedding that I didn't recognize, that had certainly never been mentioned, let alone approved by me, and was from an incredibly upscale spa. The kind frequented by celebrities and billionaires, described as a bridal bliss diamond package for 6. Chloe and 5 of her chattering, equally entitled acolytes, no doubt. Chloe's accolade, currently eye-towering. She had used my credit card, my money, without so much as a by my leave, without even the most cursory attempt at seeking permission or feigning courtesy. And then, as I scrolled numbly through my email inbox searching for the bank notification I must have overlooked in the pre-wedding whirlwind, I saw it. A forwarded message, accidentally or carelessly included in a chain about final guest counts. It was from Chloe to one of her bridesmaids, a particularly vacuous girl named Tiffany, sent on the very day those unauthorized charges had been processed. The subject line was a masterpiece of juvenile glee. Final fling before the ring. Let's do this, girls. And in the body of the email, nestled amongst giggly exclamation points and an alarming number of champagne emojis, was the damning sentence, "Don't worry your pretty little heads about the spell, ladies. Liam's mom is covering literally everything. She basically gave me a blank check, LOL. Might as well go out with a glorious, expensive bang." Glances at lovers and a spell screen of my tablet blurred. Not with tears. I realized with a strange sense of detachment, utterly beyond the solace of tears. It was a cold, white-hot, Visceral rage, so intense, so pure it felt like a physical shock, an electrocution of the soul. Spoiled rotten, yes, and I, with my desperate need for my son's happiness, my ingrained habit of self-sacrifice, had been the one diligently, blindly doing the spoiling, mistaking a bottomless, gaping pit of narcissism and entitlement for a future daughter-in-law's joy. My hands, which had trembled with suppressed emotion throughout that endless, humiliating reception, were now preternaturally steady. My mind, which only hours before had been a chaotic maelstrom of hurt, confusion, and disbelief, was now icily, terrifyingly clear. With precise, deliberate movements, I opened my email client. 3 new drafts appeared on the screen, their stark white a canvas for my newfound resolve. 2. Everbloom florists and artisanal arrangements. Subject: urgent cancellation. Order: LMV 4789, Liam and Chloe Vance, post-wedding brunch. Dear Everbloom Management, please be advised, with immediate effect, that the extensive floral arrangements and decorative installations scheduled for the post-wedding brunch for Liam and Chloe Vance, to be held at the Grand Ballroom tomorrow Sut, are no longer required. The outstanding balance for this significant portion of the contractual agreement will, therefore, be withheld. Thank you for your prompt attention to this urgent matter. Sincerely, Eleanor Vance. 2. The Nightingales Quartet and Ensemble. Subject: immediate cancellation. Contract: NQI 563B. Post-wedding brunch. Performance: Dear Nightingales Quartet, due to unforeseen and unavoidable changes in the event schedule, your musical services contracted for the post-wedding brunch for Liam and Chloe Vance will not be required tomorrow. Please consider this formal notification that the matter regarding the final payment installment for this second engagement is now closed. We appreciate your understanding of this sudden alteration. Regards, Eleanor Vance. 2. Top Shelf Catering and Bespoke Bar Services Ltd. Subject: You are just, not complete service. Cancellation, post-wedding brunch. Liam and Chloe Vance. To whom it may concern at Top Shelf Catering, this email serves as formal and immediate notification to cancel the entirety of the premium open bar service, the bespoke canapé selection, the artisanal cheese platters, and all associated staffing for the post-wedding brunch scheduled for Liam and Chloe Vance at the Grand Ballroom tomorrow ballad. Consequently, the final balance payment, as per our agreement, will not be processed. Eleanor Vance. Each email was polite. Each was professional. Each was unequivocally final. I hit send on all 3 communications just as the first pale, indifferent streaks of dawn began to paint the pre-dawn sky a bruised purple and gray. A grim, almost metallic taste of satisfaction settled over me. It wasn't joy. It wasn't even the catharsis of revenge. Not yet. It was power. A potent, electrifying sensation I hadn't realized I'd so completely relinquished until this very moment of its forceful, deliberate reclamation. Let them wake up to their perfect, fully funded hangovers and their meticulously planned, now cancelled brunch. The after-party, it seemed, was officially, irrevocably over, and the bill, for once, would not be sent to me. The drive back to my quiet, unassuming suburban house, a relic from my marriage to Robert, was a blur of rain-streaked highways and the monotonous drone of tires on wet asphalt. Had left the opulent hotel without a single word to the front desk, let alone to the frantic, unseen callers whose names still flashed accusingly on my phone screen before I finally silenced it. Each mile that separated me from the glittering, heartless city, from the scene of my profound humiliation, felt like a small, hard-won inch of reclaimed territory. My home, with its familiar, comforting scent of old books, beeswax polish, and the faint, lingering aroma of countless batches of Liam's favorite chocolate chip cookies, was meant to be a sanctuary. But peace, I quickly discovered, was a fickle, elusive creature. The oppressive silence of the house, usually a balm to my often frazzled nerves, seemed to amplify the raging tempest within me. For years, every nook and cranny of this modest dwelling had been a testament to my unwavering, often thankless devotion to Liam. Every faded photograph on the mantelpiece, capturing his gap-toothed childhood, grins and awkward teenage milestones, every carefully preserved school art project tucked away in dusty boxes in the attic. Every silent, solitary sacrifice I'd made, the career advancements I'd declined because they would have meant less time for him, the small personal luxuries I'd consistently foregone so he could have the latest gadgets, or the trendiest sneakers his father, Robert, had never bothered to provide. Robert. He'd been gone for a decade now, a sudden, dramatic exit via a massive coronary. But his charismatic, irresponsible shadow still inexplicably lingered, a faint, persistent stain on the fabric of our lives. He'd breezed out of our marriage when Liam was just 7, a charming Peter Pan-like figure who'd always prioritized the siren song of his own fleeting desires over the mundane responsibilities of family. I'd painstakingly, exhaustingly, rebuilt our fractured lives from the smoldering ashes of that casual abandonment, brick by solitary, tear-stained brick. An inexplicable restlessness propelled me towards the back of my bedroom closet, to an old crimson-red accordion file I hadn't opened in years. It was a reliquary of forgotten documents, outdated insurance policies, Liam's original birth certificate with its tiny inked footprints, Robert's stark death certificate, and nestled at the very bottom, a small, brittle bundle of letters tied with a faded, fraying silk ribbon. Letters Robert had penned to me in the chaotic, emotionally charged years immediately following his departure. Letters filled with his usual blend of theatrical remorse and self-serving justifications. Letters I'd barely been able to stomach reading even once at the time. My fingers surprisingly trembled as I untied the fragile ribbon. Why now? What spectral comfort or further torment was I even seeking in these faded relics of a past I'd tried so hard to bury? The first letter I carefully unfolded was written on thin, almost transparent airmail paper, his flamboyant, unmistakably sloping handwriting surprisingly clear despite the passage of time. It was dated mere months after he'd finally, grudgingly, signed the divorce papers, freeing me from our legal, if not emotional, entanglement. My eyes, dry and burning from lack of sleep, scanned the familiar, empty platitudes for his myriad failings, and then a paragraph that seemed to leap off the page, grabbing my breath and squeezing the air from my lungs. A sentence that made the already cold blood in my veins turn to ice. Eleanor, my dear, there's something I should have confessed to you from the very beginning, a truth I was too profound a coward to face when we stood at the altar, let alone in the years that followed. Liam? Liam is my son, yes, my flesh and blood. But my dearest Eleanor, he is not yours biologically. He was the result of an unfortunate entanglement, a regrettable dalliance from my life before you, before I even knew you, with a certainty that both humbles and shames me, that you love him as if he sprang from your own womb, and for that boundless, undeserved maternal devotion I am and will remain eternally, unworthily grateful. The flimsy letter fluttered from my suddenly numb, nerveless fingers, drifting to the carpet like a dying leaf. Not mine? Liam? My Liam? The infant had nursed through colicky nights, whose first hesitant steps I had witnessed with tears of joy, whose countless scraped knees had meticulously cleaned and kissed, better with a mother's fierce tenderness. My mind reeled, a dizzying kaleidoscope of memories, each one now tainted, fractured by this devastating revelation. Robert had confessed, tearfully and theatrically, to a brief, regrettable affair shortly after Liam was born, blaming stress, loneliness, the usual pathetic litany of excuses. I, young, naive, and desperately clinging to the wreckage of my marriage, had, after much internal struggle, forgiven him, or at least I had chosen to try. I had poured every ounce of my love, my energy, my very being into Liam, perhaps subconsciously determined to be the perfect mother, to compensate for his father's egregious failings, for that early, gaping wound inflicted upon our fragile family. But this was a different magnitude of deceit altogether. He wasn't just the product of an affair that had occurred during our marriage. He was a child Robert had knowingly, deceitfully brought into our marriage under an even greater, more fundamental lie. My hands shook violently as I fumbled for another letter from the brittle pile, this one dated much, much later, penned only weeks, perhaps days, before Robert's sudden, dramatic exit from life. His handwriting was noticeably shakier now, the familiar, confident loops and flourishes cramped and uncertain, the words themselves imbued with a palpable, almost frantic desperation. My dearest, long-suffering Eleanor, if you are ever to read these tormented words, it means the crushing weight of my lifelong guilt has finally become too immense for me to bear in silence. Or perhaps I am already gone, and the truth, however painful, no longer matters, except for the closure, the understanding you so richly deserve, the true story of Liam, even in my most abject moments. The woman, his biological mother. She was young, yes, terrified, certainly, but also ruthlessly pragmatic. She didn't want him. She viewed him as an impediment, a shameful secret. She presented me with an ultimatum: ensure his discreet disappearance, or face the ruin of my then burgeoning career and social standing. Adoption, she insisted, far away, no trace leading back to her carefully constructed life. Perhaps more accurately, I was too morally bankrupt, too utterly weak, to do the right thing. I brought him home to you, a helpless, innocent infant, and I spun you a web of half-truths and outright lies, allowing you to believe he was a simple, albeit painful, consequence of my later infidelity. I allowed you, no, I manipulated you into opening your generous, unsuspecting heart to him, into dedicating your entire life to his upbringing. You, Eleanor, you were the mother he needed, the mother he was never meant to have by blood, but the one he was so profoundly blessed to receive by a grace he, and I, did nothing to earn. I burdened your innocent soul with my most grievous sin, and you, with your extraordinary capacity for love, somehow transformed it into— Can you ever, in your heart, find a sliver of forgiveness for this deepest, most calculated betrayal? The room tilted precariously. The air grew thin, unbreathable. He wasn't mine, not in any conventional, biological sense. He was a secret Robert had nurtured, a catastrophic responsibility Robert had deftly shirked and then, with crafty cynicism, laid at my unsuspecting feet like an unwanted parcel. And I had unquestioningly picked him up. I had cherished him, fiercely, unconditionally. Every single sacrifice, every sleepless, worry-filled night, every hard-earned penny saved, every career ambition deferred, it had all been for a child who was, in the cold, unblinking eyes of the world, a stranger's unwanted offspring. The shrill, insistent ringing of the telephone on the kitchen counter sliced through the suffocating silence. I glanced numbly at the caller ID. Chloe. Of course. I let it ring, each peal an accusation. Then a text message flashed onto its small screen, Chloe's name glowing with venomous intensity. Eleanor, Liam is beside himself with distress. What you did with the brunch cancellations was incredibly petty, childish, and frankly embarrassing. You've completely ruined everything. We had a vision for our post-wedding brunch. How could you be so selfish? Petty? Childish? Selfish? A strangled, mirthless laugh like the caw of a dying crow escaped my lips, ruined her vision. After she and my son had systematically, cruelly, attempted to erase me from theirs, relegating me to the shadows of their glittering, self-absorbed world. With a newfound, almost terrifying calm, I walked over to my antique writing desk, pulled out a blank check from my personal checkbook, the one linked to the account I'd used for the seemingly endless torrent of wedding expenses. With a hand that was now rock steady, I wrote it out to Liam and Chloe Vance. In the memo line, with deliberate, precise strokes, I wrote, the amount I inscribed was the full, staggering, six-figure sum I had expended on their nuptial fantasy. I took a clear photo of it with my phone, carefully blurring the account number but leaving my signature, Eleanor M. Vance, clear, bold, and defiant. Then I logged onto Facebook, a social media platform I rarely frequented, finding it usually a morass of curated happiness and humble brags. I uploaded the photo of the check, no caption, no lengthy explanation, no recriminations, just the stark, undeniable image. A silent, irrefutable public testament to my contribution and their ingratitude. I didn't cry. There were no tears left, just a vast, cold, empty clarity. The humiliated, heartbroken woman who had been unceremoniously seated in the kitchen was gone, vanished as if she'd never existed. In her place stood someone else, someone forged in the crucible of profound deceits and public humiliation, someone who was finally, terrifyingly, breathtakingly free. The silence that descended as I decisively turned off my phone again wasn't the silence of cowed submission. It was the charged, ominous silence of a gathering storm. And this time, I knew with absolute certainty the storm was mine to command. The Facebook post, that single uncaptured image of a check, detonated like a precisely placed depth charge in the usually placid waters of our extended social sphere. My phone, when I finally dared to switch it back on the following afternoon, bracing myself for the inevitable digital shrapnel, was an electronic cacophony of notifications, a deluge of friend requests from individuals I hadn't spoken to in decades, former colleagues, distant relatives, old school acquaintances. A flood of private messages, ranging from bewildered inquiries to expressions of unadulterated support, from shared stories of similar maternal slights to a few predictably thinly veiled accusations of inappropriate behavior from individuals clearly orbiting within Chloe's gilded sphere of influence. Messages from other women, mothers mostly, who had felt overlooked, underappreciated, their lifelong sacrifices casually dismissed or taken for granted. My silent, digital scream of indignation had, it appeared, resonated deeply with a previously silent choir. Liam's voicemails, when I could bring myself to listen to them, were the most painful to endure. The first few were frantic, tinged with a bewildered, almost boyish confusion. "Mom? What's going on? People are calling me. Chloe's hysterical. Did you really cancel the brunch? Mom, what the hell are you trying to do? You're embarrassing us. You're embarrassing me. Everyone's talking about that check thing. This is not who you are. You've deliberately crossed a line. You're trying to ruin the happiest time of my life." Crossed a line, I mused, a bitter, ironic smile playing on my lips. They had unceremoniously shoved me into a dark, forgotten service entrance corner of their perfect day, and now they were aghast, genuinely surprised that I'd found a way to switch on a very bright, very public and deeply unflattering spotlight. With a newfound decisive resolve, I deleted his contact from my phone, not his number from the recesses of my memory. That, I suspected, would be an impossible feat. But his name, his privileged status as an immediate demanding ping on my screen, was summarily expunged. It was a small, symbolic act of severance, but it felt disproportionately significant. A tiny reclaiming of my own digital and emotional space. A few days later, wrapped in a fragile armor of feigned indifference, I ventured out to the local supermarket, a mundane errand that suddenly felt like navigating a minefield. Amidst the brightly lit, overstocked aisles of produce, a riot of aggressively cheerful colors, she spotted me, and her usually open, friendly smile faltered, replaced by a hesitant, deeply uncomfortable expression, tinged with an awkwardness I instantly recognized as residual guilt. "Eleanor? Oh, hi." She fiddled nervously with the strap of her leather handbag, her gaze darting anywhere but directly at my face. I simply nodded, my expression carefully neutral, waiting. The onus, I felt, was not on me to ease her discomfort. "Look," she began, her voice lowered to a conspiratorial whisper, as if we were discussing state secrets rather than egregious social cruelty. "About the wedding, about, where you were sitting. Well, we all noticed. Several of us commented on it. It felt incredibly wrong, Eleanor. And yet," I stated, my voice even, devoid of accusation but firm in its observation, "no one said a single word to Chloe or to Liam. No one thought to bring me a glass of water or a canapé, or even just to acknowledge my presence with more than a fleeting, pitying glance." Olivia flushed a deep, unbecoming crimson from her neck to the roots of her carefully highlighted hair. "I know. I'm so sorry, Eleanor. Truly, deeply sorry. Someone should have done something, said something. It was an unforgivable way to treat you, especially Chloe. And Liam, for him to just stand by." "Yes," I said, the single word carrying the weight of my profound disappointment. It was. Her apology, however belated and inadequate, felt like a tiny, unexpected crack of light in a very dark, suffocating room. It didn't fix anything, of course. The wound was too deep, the disrespect too profound, but it was something, a small human acknowledgement of the wrong that had been done. "Thank you for saying that, Olivia. It means something to hear it." She looked visibly relieved, as if a palpable burden had been lifted from her shoulders. Small comfort for her, I thought with a touch of wariness, but I wouldn't begrudge her that fleeting moment of absolution. My own path to peace would be far longer, far more arduous. When I returned to the quiet solitude of my home, a garish, funereal-looking bouquet of chemically dyed carnations, the cheap, already wilting kind, an olfactory assault of artificial sweetness, lay abandoned on my porch. There was no card, no note of explanation, but I knew instinctively they were from Liam, or perhaps a reluctant, ill-conceived gesture orchestrated by a fuming Chloe, a peace offering that reeked of insincerity. I picked them up with 2 fingers, as if handling something distasteful, carried them directly to the municipal trash bin at the curb, and dropped them in without a moment's hesitation. Some gestures are too little, too late, and far too insulting to even be brought across the threshold of one's home. That evening, unable to resist the morbid curiosity, I scrolled through the endless stream of comments accumulating beneath my Facebook post. One, nestled amongst the expressions of outrage and sympathy, particularly stood out. It was from a woman I vaguely knew from an old book club I'd briefly attended years ago, before Liam's escalating needs had consumed all my free time. "Dearest Eleanor, this image broke my heart for you, and yet, paradoxically, it also filled me with a strange, unexpected surge of strength. Thank you. Thank you for showing so many of us that we don't have to silently accept being made invisible." That's precisely what I had been to them. A convenient, walking, talking checkbook, an endlessly patient emotional shock absorber, a problem to be discreetly hidden away in the kitchen's steamy chaos so as not to mar the flawless aesthetic of their meticulously curated public image. I began to clear out the house in earnest then. Not just the superficial dusting and tidying I usually performed, but a deep, profoundly symbolic purging of accumulated emotional and physical clutter. Boxes upon boxes of Liam's old school reports, his much-loved childhood toys I'd lovingly, foolishly preserved, clothes he'd outgrown decades ago but which I hadn't been able to bring myself to part with. Each item a tangible, painful memory. Each object was a memory, yes, a testament to a love I didn't regret, but also a heavy, suffocating tether to a past where my entire identity had been solely, exclusively defined by the all-consuming role of being Liam's mother. In the back of that same crimson-red accordion file where I'd unearthed Robert's devastating letters, tucked into a stiff, overlooked side pocket, I found yet another envelope, smaller this time, more brittle with age, the paper yellowed at the edges, Robert's distinctive flamboyant handwriting again. This one, however, felt different, heavier, more ominous. My heart began to pound a frantic, suffocating rhythm against my ribs as I carefully, almost reverently, slit it open with a vintage silver letter opener, a forgotten gift from my own mother. This letter, I noted with a chill, was written mere days, perhaps even hours before his fatal heart attack, as if he sensed his time was rapidly, irrevocably running out, as if this was his final, desperate attempt to unburden his conscience. "My dearest, long-suffering Eleanor," it began, the script weaker than in his earlier letters, more erratic, yet filled with a raw, almost unbearable urgency. "There is one last terrible truth about Liam, the most painful and damning of all my deceptions, that I find I must confess before I face whatever judgment awaits me. The young woman who bore him, she was a scared, desperate girl, yes, but she was also unyielding. She presented me not with a request, but with an ultimatum: his life, or her continued silence about my many other indiscretions, which were far more numerous and sordid than you ever knew, my dear. She didn't just not want him, she saw him as a tangible, ruinous burden to be expediently discarded. She demanded, with a chilling lack of emotion, that I arrange an immediate adoption, far away, no questions asked, no trace leading back to her or her influential family. I was a contemptible coward, Eleanor, a moral vacuum. I told you, he was mine from an affair, a simple if shameful biological fact. But the unvarnished, brutal truth is, I essentially brought him into our new marriage almost as a foundling, a profoundly inconvenient problem I hadn't the foggiest notion how to solve, secretly, desperately hoping that your innate goodness, your maternal strength, you would somehow solve it for me. And you did, my extraordinary Eleanor. You did. You loved him without question, without hesitation. You made him irrevocably your son. You were the miracle he so profoundly didn't deserve, and you were the earthly salvation that I, your wretched husband, certainly didn't. He was never truly mine to give you, Eleanor, not in any honorable sense. The room began to swim before my eyes. The floor seemed to drop away beneath my feet. The sheer weight of this final, devastating revelation was crushing, unbearable. Not just a child of his affair, not just a secret brought into our marriage, but a child who had been, in essence, abandoned by both biological parents, then callously, deceitfully foisted upon me through layers upon layers of calculated lies and cruel emotional manipulation. My entire adult life, my most profound sacrifices, hadn't just been for my husband's illegitimate child. They'd been for a child whose own parents had, in their own distinct and selfish ways, utterly rejected him. And I had stayed, I had loved, I had built a world for him. The embers of my still moldering anger towards Liam, towards Chloe, towards the ghost of Robert, began to shift, to transmute. Beneath them, a different, unfamiliar fire was kindling. Not the destructive fire of consuming rage, but the bright, defiant flame of a fierce, almost exultant pride in the woman I had unknowingly been, the mother I had chosen to be, against all odds, against all betrayals, against all reason. And with that pride came a new, unshakable, steely resolve for the woman I was, at long last, about to become. The old house felt profoundly different in the days that followed Robert's final, devastating letter. Lighter somehow, as if a great unspoken suffocating weight had finally been named, and in the very act of being named, had lost a significant portion of its insidious power over me. I began to notice the small, forgotten beauties of my surroundings with a new, almost childlike clarity. The intricate way the late afternoon sun slanted through the dusty living room window, creating dancing patterns on the worn Persian rug, the specific, delicate shade of periwinkle blue in my grandmother's favorite china teacup, the quiet, unadulterated joy of a book read solely for my own pleasure, not for parental guidance, professional development, or merely as an escape from an unfulfilling reality. I began to cook for myself again, with a passion I hadn't felt in years. Not Liam's bland, repetitive favorite casseroles, nor the quick utilitarian meals I'd often thrown together after a long day of work and single parenting. Instead, I unearthed old, cherished recipe books, dog-eared pages marking dishes I'd once loved, but had long since forgotten in the relentless grind of motherhood. Lemon and thyme roasted chicken with crispy potatoes, creamy saffron risotto, a taste of a long-ago trip to Italy with a dear friend. A rich, decadent, dark chocolate mousse, eaten slowly, savored with every spoonful. The house, my house, began to fill with the aromas of my life, my preferences, my burgeoning desires, not just the lingering ghostly scent of past sacrifices and someone else's half-eaten meals. My phone still buzzed intermittently with messages from unknown or blocked numbers. Undoubtedly Liam or Chloe, or perhaps even Chloe's indignant mother, Diana, attempting to breach the wall of silence I had erected. I ignored them with a steadfast, almost serene indifference. What, after all, was there left to say? Their apologies, if they ever materialized, would inevitably be for the uncomfortable consequences they were now facing, not for the egregious actions and calculated cruelties that had wounded me so profoundly. Their sorrow would be for themselves. Then, one crisp Saturday afternoon, precisely 1 week after the wedding that now felt like a surreal, technicolor nightmare from a distant lifetime, there was a knock at my front door, not the hesitant, apologetic tap of a delivery person or a canvasser. Liam. He stood on my weather-beaten porch, looking diminished, a pale imitation of the confident, beaming groom from the previous weekend. The expensive, impeccably tailored wedding suit was gone, replaced by a rumpled, unironed shirt and faded jeans that hung loosely on his frame. There were dark, bruised-looking circles under his eyes, testament to sleepless nights, or perhaps a dawning, uncomfortable understanding. The arrogant, entitled swagger that Chloe had so obviously admired and encouraged was conspicuously, blessedly absent. I opened the door slowly, my expression carefully, deliberately unreadable. A blank slate. "Mom?" His voice was low, hoarse, uncertain. He looked like a lost boy. I didn't reply, didn't offer a word of greeting or condemnation. I simply stepped aside, a silent, ambiguous invitation to enter the house he had once called home. He hesitated for a long moment, his gaze flickering nervously from my impassive face to the familiar interior of the hallway. Then, with a visible effort, he walked past me. The house was cleaner than usual, I realized, almost stark. Sunlight streamed across the polished wooden floor of the living room. On the mahogany mantelpiece, where a carefully curated gallery of his childhood and adolescent photographs had once proudly resided, there were now only faint rectangular dust outlines. He noticed immediately a flicker of something. Surprise? Confusion? Hurt perhaps crossed his tired face. Where are all the pictures?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, as if afraid of the answer. I ignored the question, the implied accusation. "Sit down, Liam," I said, my tone calm, flat, devoid of any discernible emotion. He obeyed wordlessly, sinking heavily into the worn, comfortable armchair across from me, the one Robert had always favored. a fact that now struck me with a fresh wave of bitter irony. An uneasy, suffocating silence filled the room, broken only by the relentless, rhythmic ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that suddenly seemed to be measuring out the final, irrevocable moments of our old relationship. Finally he spoke, running an agitated hand through his already disheveled hair. I just don't understand what happened, Mom. One minute everything was perfect, the wedding was incredible, and the next, you're canceling things, posting that check on Facebook. Why? Why would you do that to us? To me? The familiar refrain. The bewildered victim. He still didn't get it. He still saw himself and Chloe as the injured parties, me as the inexplicable perpetrator. I rose from my chair, a sudden wariness settling deep into my bones, and walked over to the old mahogany secretary that stood in the corner, a silent witness to generations of family dramas. From its depths, I retrieved 2 items: a thick, slightly battered manila envelope and the small, brittle bundle of Robert's last letters. Pretty sensible metal envelope. What's this?" he asked, his eyes narrowed with a wary apprehension. "Receipts," I said, my voice as cool and smooth as river stones. "Every single one, from your perfect, incredible wedding, the ridiculously overpriced venue you insisted upon because Chloe fell in love with its unique charm, the 6-course gourmet meal she meticulously designed with the celebrity chef, the imported out-of-season flowers that cost a king's ransom, the bespoke silk-lined invitations that were apparently to find the itemized receipts for Chloe's little pre-wedding spa day extravaganza with her 5 closest friends, and for her rather spirited VIP cocktail party at that exclusive downtown lounge, all charged, without my knowledge, without my consent, to my credit card." His eyes scanned the top few receipts I'd fanned out for his perusal, but his hand, hovering just above them, didn't dare to touch them. His face, already pale, seemed to drain of its remaining color, leaving it a sickly, chalky white. "And these," I continued, my voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying an undeniable weight as I gently indicated the small, faded bundle of letters, "these are from your father. His last words, in a way. His final truths." I watched him, dispassionately, as he picked up the letters, his brow furrowed in a mixture of confusion and dawning dread. I watched, a silent observer, as he read the first one, the one revealing the initial layer of Robert's deception about his parentage. Then I watched as his eyes, wide with a growing, horrified disbelief, devoured the second, more damning, more devastating one. I saw the color completely drain from his face, leaving it a mask of stunned comprehension. I saw the subtle, then more pronounced tremor that started in his hands and spread through his entire body. He looked up at me then, his expression utterly shattered, his voice a choked, strangled whisper, the confident man from the wedding entirely vanquished. You knew all this time? About me?" "I know now, Liam," I corrected him, my voice surprisingly gentle, almost pitying. "I learned the full, unvarnished truth only very recently. But I knew enough of Robert's deceptions, enough of his character from the very beginning of our marriage to commit my entire life to you, to love you as my own, unconditionally, without reservation. A choice I made every single day." He swallowed hard, the damning letters falling from his suddenly nerveless grasp onto the carpet between us. So you're angry because I'm not your—" "No, Liam," I cut him off, my voice firm again, but quiet, devoid of any lingering histrionics. "I am not angry because of who your biological parents were or weren't. I am heartbroken, Liam, because I raised you. I was your mother in every single way that truly mattered. I gave you everything I had and sacrificed everything I was. And when the moment finally came for you to acknowledge that, to honor that bond, to stand up and simply say, This woman, my mother, who has given me everything, deserves respect, deserves a place of honor. You chose silence. You chose complicity. You chose to allow your bride, a woman you'd known for a mere fraction of your life, to push me into a kitchen, to treat me like an embarrassing inconvenience, a piece of unwanted furniture. He looked down then, his gaze fixed on the pattern of the worn rug, shame radiating from him in palpable waves. Charlie said she truly believed. She said it was just for the pictures, that it would look aesthetically better. She didn't think, we didn't think, you'd mind so much, that you'd be so hurt. His voice was barely audible. I let out a short, sharp, mirthless laugh, the sound like breaking glass in the stillness of the room. She didn't think. And you, Liam? Did you think? Did you for one single solitary moment think about the decades I poured into you? Did you think about the fundamental meaning of family, of loyalty, of simple common human decency? I stood up then, a profound weariness settling into my very marrow, and walked over to the bare patch of wall on the mantelpiece where one of his cherished kindergarten graduation photos used to hang. I touched the faint outline in the dust. This used to be you, Liam, beaming with a gap-toothed grin, your paper crown askew, marker stains on your shirt. You ran off that makeshift stage straight into my arms. I was so incredibly proud that day. My heart felt like it would burst. I turned back to face him, my gaze steady, unwavering. I am done, Liam. I am completely, irrevocably done. Done holding on to idealized, outdated versions of you and of myself that clearly no longer exist if they ever truly did. I am not your convenient backdrop anymore. I am not your convenient backdrop anymore. He flinched visibly, as if I'd physically struck him. Mom, please, don't say that. His voice was a broken plea. No, I said, my voice quiet but utterly final. I picked up the thick manila envelope full of receipts from the coffee table, closed the clasp and handed it to him. These are yours now. Take them. Every single one. A tangible reminder of the wedding you had, the perfect day you orchestrated, and the true price that was paid for it, in every conceivable sense. He took the envelope, his hand shaking so violently he could barely grasp it. I walked him to the front door, a silent, inexorable usher. He paused on the threshold, his broad shoulders slumped in defeat, and looked back at me, his eyes, so like Robert's in that moment, filled with an expression of utter devastating desolation. He was searching, desperately searching, for a crack in my resolve, a flicker of the unconditional softness, a sign that the door, this door, might somehow, someday open again for him. But it wouldn't, not in the same way. That door had closed forever. You always said, you always told me, I was your whole world, he whispered, his voice thick with unshed, self-pitying tears. You were, Liam, I replied, my voice surprisingly steady, almost serene. You absolutely were, and now at long last I am finally, gloriously mine. And then, with a sense of profound, liberating finality, I gently but firmly closed the door. The silence that descended upon the house after Liam's departure was entirely different from any I had known before. It wasn't the silence of loneliness, nor the tense, brittle silence of unspoken resentments. It was spacious, expansive, filled with the quiet, expectant hum of new possibility, ghosts of the past, Robert's casual cruelties and lifelong deceptions, Liam's heartbreaking betrayals, Chloe's calculated, venomous spite. They were still there, of course, faint outlines in the tapestry of my memory, but they no longer held the power to haunt me, to dictate my present. They were simply facts, acknowledged, processed, and meticulously filed away in the archives of a life I was determined to reshape. With a lightness of spirit I hadn't experienced in decades, I began to plan a dinner, not a lavish, ostentatious, performative affair like the wedding had been, designed to impress strangers and mask insecurities. This would be something small, intimate, deeply meaningful. I drew up an invitation list on a simple linen-page notepad with Sophia, my oldest, dearest friend, a rock of steadfast loyalty who had listened without judgment, without platitudes, to my tearful, incoherent calls in the raw, immediate aftermath of the wedding. My next-door neighbor, old Mr. Abernathy, a retired history professor with twinkling eyes and a generous heart, who always cleared my snow-covered driveway before I even woke up on winter mornings and shared his abundant prize-winning heirloom tomatoes in the summer. A few cherished women from my old book club, the ones whose quietly insightful messages of support on Facebook had touched me so profoundly, reminding me I wasn't entirely alone. People who saw me, Eleanor Vance, the individual, not just Liam's long-suffering mother or Robert's embittered ex-wife. The preparations for this small gathering became a quiet, deeply satisfying joy. I chose the menu myself with meticulous care. Dishes I genuinely loved to cook, vibrant flavors that made my own palate happy, not bland compromises designed to appease someone else's less adventurous tastes. I bought a new tablecloth, a cheerful, optimistic sunflower yellow, a stark contrast to the muted, mournful beiges and grays that had slowly, insidiously taken over my home. I polished my own mother's antique silverware, a task I hadn't undertaken in years, not for show or impressing guests, but for the simple, tactile pleasure of using beautiful, cherished things. My house, once a silent mausoleum of past sacrifices, began to fill with the warm, inviting aromas of baking bread, roasting herbs, and slowly simmering sauces. It smelled, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, home. Like my home. The evening of the dinner, my small, carefully chosen group of guests arrived, not with the stiff formality or thinly veiled sense of obligation that had permeated the wedding, but with genuine, unreserved warmth. There were heartfelt hugs at the door, bottles of good, unpretentious wine offered with easy smiles, peels of authentic, unrestrained shadows of past sorrows. We gathered around my sturdy oak dining table, the very same table where Liam had once laboriously done his multiplication homework, where Robert had spun his charming, empty promises, but tonight it felt utterly transformed. It was laden not with ostentation, but with good, honest food, surrounded by true, steadfast friends, illuminated by the soft, forgiving glow of dozens of beeswax candles. Sophia, her intelligent eyes sparkling with affection and a touch of mischievousness, raised her wine glass mid-meal. "I'd like to propose a toast," she announced, her voice warm and resonant, "to our dearest Eleanor." Everyone murmured their heartfelt agreement, their faces reflecting a genuine affection that warmed me to my core, for her incredible, often underestimated strength, for her profound resilience in the face of unimaginable trials, and most importantly, for reminding every single one of us here tonight that it is never, ever too late to reclaim your narrative, to find your voice, and to take your rightful, honored seat at the very head of your own table. Glasses clinked, a cheerful, harmonious sound. Tears pricked at the back of my eyes, but these were entirely different tears from the bitter, helpless ones I'd shed in that cold hotel room. These were tears of profound gratitude, of cathartic release, of a joy so pure it felt almost unfamiliar. I stood up, my hand surprisingly steady as I raised my own glass, my gaze sweeping over each beloved, supportive face around that table. People connected to me not by the arbitrary bonds of blood or the burdensome chains of duty, but by the freely given, infinitely precious ties of genuine affection, unwavering respect, and shared humanity. "Thank you, my dearest Sophia," I said, my voice clear and strong, resonating with a newfound confidence I hadn't realized I possessed. "Your words mean more to me than I can ever express, and I'd like to add my own small sentiment to that beautiful toast. I took a deep breath, a sense of profound peace settling over me. To all the mothers everywhere who have stayed silent for far too long, swallowing their pain, their dreams, their very selves, for the sake of others, to all the women who have given everything, poured out their hearts and souls, only to be told in countless cruel ways that it still wasn't enough. To all those who have been relegated to the shadows, asked to sit in the kitchen after they have painstakingly, lovingly built the damn house from the ground up. A wry smile touched my lips. This is for us. May we never again accept a folding chair in a service corridor. May we always, unequivocally, know our immeasurable worth. And may we never, ever again sit down, unless it is by our own joyful choosing, at the very head of our own magnificent table, surrounded by those who not only see us, but who truly, deeply cherish us for exactly who we are. A chorus of heartfelt "hear, hear," and more enthusiastic clinking of glasses followed. I sat down then, not in the shadows, not hidden out of sight, not exiled to a cold, impersonal service entrance, but in my chair, in my rightful place, filled with a sense of peace so profound, so complete, it felt like coming home to myself after a very long, very arduous, and utterly transformative journey. Liam, I heard through the grapevine of family obligation via Olivia, never called me again with hollow apologies or resentful demands. He and Chloe, their fairy tale union built on such shallow, selfish foundations, eventually, predictably, divorced. He was, by all accounts, struggling, forced to confront the consequences of his choices, attempting to rebuild his life from the ground up. I felt a distant, lingering pang of sorrow, not for the man he had become, but for the innocent, loving boy he had once been, the boy I had cherished. But I felt no regret for the decision I had made, the door I had closed. The next morning I woke early, not to the jarring buzz of an alarm clock, but to the gentle, melodic sound of birdsong outside my bedroom window and the soft, caressing sunlight streaming through the curtains. There was no familiar tightness in my chest, no bitter, chemalic aftertaste of resentment, just peace. I made myself a strong cup of coffee, the way I truly liked it, and sat on my porch, wrapped in my favorite old, comfortable robe, the gentle morning breeze fluttering its worn fabric. I looked out at my small, slightly wild garden, at the roses I had planted years ago, now blooming with a fierce, untamed, vibrant abandon. I was no longer a supporting character, a silently suffering extra in someone else's poorly written drama. I was, at long last, the undisputed, unapologetic protagonist of my own remarkable life. And finally, that was more than enough. It was, in fact, absolutely everything.